Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's a moment every parent dreads. When a voice on the phone tells you that your child is on trial for a crime. The offense at first sounds harmless enough, something any boy might try once, you know. Peer pressure, blood pressure, girls. It was deadly serious, nonetheless, and I needed to hire an advocate to plead my son's case, beg for forgiveness, and promise he would never do any such thing again. Lewd conduct, nudity, blood and blasphemy, total pagan depravity, and I had to ask my son, what on earth have you got yourself into? You're only 2 days old. And the baby smiled at me. Then it all came back, a haunting, nightmarish memory that I'd repressed so deeply I could hardly believe it was only 48 hours before. There was a woman, half Jamaican, half Irish, and I don't mean Catholic Protestant Irish, I mean Old Irish. She was in some kind of trance, panting, writhing, making noises you hear in wildlife specials about lions and elephants. And there were 2 other women whispering medical incantations somewhere in a jungle. No, not a jungle. It was an apartment in Manhattan with a lot of potted plants in the windows. And somewhere in the room was a horrified man, half Jewish, half English, asking if there was anything he could do to help, desperately wishing someone would say, yes, leave, go have a cigar somewhere. And that man was me. And then there was some kind of volcanic eruption, except it was upside down, pointed at the center of the earth. And the floor became a primeval swamp. And then things got quiet. And a baby cried. And the midwife handed me my son. I was later told that as home births go, this one had been pretty calm and normal, and with 80% less shouted blasphemies than a hospital birth. Take that, leading brand. I wasn't scared of parenthood. My philosophy is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And for all the books and unsolicited advice and financial planning or whatever the people get sucked into preparing for parenthood, ultimately, only one person can teach you how to be a parent, and that's your child.
Yes.
And they're not going to teach you how to be some generic brand parent. Your child is going to teach you how to be their parent. And I wasn't scared of any hazards of home birth. I'm more scared of hospital births, when they dress a father in a gown and a mask. That's not really my style. And in hospitals, they've got all those great space-age machines that go ping, but medical science has not yet figured out that gravity pulls toward the center of the earth. And so they'll put a woman on her back for 19 hours, waiting for gravity to pull the baby that way, and then they get bored and sling out the knives. I mean, delivery ward, they should call it what it is, the chop shop. I find that terrifying. Then we did the home birth thing, and I realized birth is scary and nasty anywhere, anytime. None of my relatives really seem to mind my having played some part in the bizarre pagan ritual of natural childbirth. I'm kind of a lost cause. But there was great concern over my replacement, this new Snodgrass, who had already been accessory to the crime of primitive goddess worship. Brand spanking new, but guilty until proven innocent. And as his guardian, the least I could do was promise to keep him from ever committing such a crime again. And I wondered, could I do it? Could I steer our son into the arms of our Father who art in heaven, deliver him from the evils of Earth Mother heresy? I looked at him, he looked at me, and I attempted some father-son telepathy. Now see here, Junior, we're Snodgrasses. We come from a long, distinguished line of pig farmers who got kicked out of England and Jews who got kicked out of everywhere. Which means I am responsible for teaching you 2 things, propriety and anxiety. Will these be enough to turn you from the path of goddess worship? And he rolled his eyes up and focused more intently on what he was doing at the moment, lazily nursing. I had picked a poor time to ask the question, and his answer was clear. I don't know who you are, blurry, flat-chested figure, but I am worshiping a goddess right now, and I am not sorry. Come back when you've sprouted a pair. And I thought, you just wait right there. I am going to write a sermon that is going to be 10 times as satisfying as breast milk. This sermon is going to be so good, you won't care if you never see a woman's naked breast again. And then I realized I'd never given a sermon before. And I had never heard one, or heard of one, that was better than breasts. Besides which, because of the language barrier, I was going to have to translate the entire thing into eyebrow twitches, which might give my son the impression that I was insane. And then I realized I didn't want to write a sermon that was better than breasts. I wanted what he was having. I wanted her all for myself. And I leaned in to see he'd been drinking pretty hard. Maybe he'd passed out. And his eyes rolled open and found me. And in the telepathic link I'd forgot to hang up, he said, if you ever try to get between me and this breast, I will kill you. And I beamed back, what? You've been alive 2 days and you're practicing some pagan goddess religion and you've been reading Sigmund Freud? Not to be outdone by a newborn, I decided it was time I read some Sigmund Freud too. You know, see how many years I had left before baby Oedipus would make my wife a widow and pick her up on the rebound. And it turned out Dr. Freud had written a lot of stuff that wasn't about a son's desire to kill his father and claim his mother. By this I mean I read the wrong book. But the book I read had a lot of interesting stuff in it. You know, Freud writes that religion begins with something he calls the oceanic feeling, a sense of limitless, unbounded connection with the universe, where there's no barrier separating the inner self from the outer world. And this primal religious impulse, the oceanic feeling, he tells us, is initially felt by the breastfeeding infant. Hunger, the inner desire, is perfectly joined with the external world in the form of a breast. Now, as a man, yes, I do sometimes feel that breasts are the most significant thing in the universe. But to an infant, breasts are the universe. Everything that's good about it anyway. My study of the religion of infants led me to a study of the infancy of religion. What can we learn about the earliest religion practiced by the human race? From the archaeological evidence and libraries full of scholarship, you could pretty much sum it all up in a word: breasts. The oldest signs of religion to be unearthed by excavators are stone statues of, let's say, full-bodied women. And the first guys to find these thought that they must be some form of primitive pornography. But that did not explain why so many of the statues were clearly pregnant and some in labor. And I can tell you, as a man who's seen labor, there is nothing erotically stimulating about it. Then some anthropologists said, no, this isn't pornography. This is theology. Apparently, in humanity's younger days, by which I mean the 3 million years before we began our self-destructive adolescence, humanity thought of divinity as some sort of mother. Like the earth was some kind of abundant mother, cranking out children and pumping them full of food. And not just people. This mother had all sorts of children: rabbits, mosquitoes, birds, trees, grass, fish, lions, etc. And sure, all the children ate each other, but they didn't hate each other. They were siblings, after all, prone to rivalry, but not genocide. And if one of these children became a bully, eating off of everybody else's plate, getting fat, and chasing all the other children off the playground, well then that kid, that species, would eventually have to go to bed without supper for a week or a month or a year until it shrunk down to a size where it could play nice with the other children. And all of these children had the same prayer, and it was the same prayer that my 2-day-old son would have said. Give us this day our daily breast. You know, this is a little uncomfortable for me. You've probably heard 1,000 sermons about breasts, but I do hear myself say that and say, shh, we don't talk about that in here. Eventually, someone, probably a guy who had to sit out for being too rough with the other kids, said, you know what really bothers me about Mom? She doesn't play favorites. She doesn't make exceptions to the rules for me. You know who does? Dad. He's just like me, and he likes me best. Well, how do you know he's like you? Well, you can't see him. He's in the sky, but he looks just like me, and I'll beat you down if you say otherwise. All right, all right. Does that mean that he looks like me? And that guy over there? And like her? Are we her favorites too? No. I mean, he resembles you more than he resembles a porcupine or a trout, but he looks the most like me. We're his favorites, but I'm his favorite. Now go get God's favorite son some yams, a year's supply of yams. Now, this isn't a transcript written in stone, but somehow some guy convinced other guys that there was a male father figure in the sky who played favorites. Unsurprisingly, those favorites were men who looked just like him. I know what he did. He came up with a sermon that was better than breasts. He said, hey son, good news. God likes man, God is a man, and God likes men best, especially men who look like us. And the best part of all, you like breasts, you got it, all you can eat, because God made women for us. They belong to us. Guys must have loved that sermon. I mean, many of them still do. You know, it made me a little uncomfortable. I had spent all this time studying history, reading about the disastrous effects of men believing that they were exempt from the laws of nature. Maybe I'm not so comfortable with the idea of God playing favorites. And so, even having discovered the great sermon, I decided not to eyebrow it to our son. And my wife, by the way, is totally fluent in eyebrow language. My eyebrows get me in trouble all the time. And I say, what did I say? What did I say? Anyway, so even if I'd wanted to eyebrow the great sermon to our son, she would have said, are you telling our son that God is a mink? And that God likes minks better than wombats? You'd better be, because I know you're not telling him God likes men better than women. There would have been some trouble. And sure, I could have said, but the Bible tells me so. Which would have been a perfectly reasonable defense if my intention was to become a monk. Because me and my Bible would have had many a long and celibate night after that. Then I remembered the phone call, the accusation, the crime, the due process, a relative asking, when were we going to get our son baptized? Of course, I didn't have to give my son the great sermon. The professionals would do it. And I didn't. And they would cleanse him of the sin of touching a naked woman. He would be symbolically born again from the watery, marble-carved womb of a male God. We could beg forgiveness for the crime, promise never let him worship a woman again, and maybe even get one of those embarrassing baptism bonnet photographs to blackmail him with later. And the professionals would word everything so carefully that no one could understand, even if they were paying attention. My wife could find me totally innocent. It was perfect. Except for one problem. I married a seminary graduate, and she knows exactly what all of that ecclesiabracadabra stuff means. In seminary school, they teach you fancy, esoteric terms for the 3 events in life that are most important for ritual reenactment. Especially important because for many people, these are the only 3 times you'll actually see them in a church. The time-honored ecclesiological terms are hatch 'em, match 'em, dispatch 'em. Hatch 'em means birth, dreamed up, no doubt, by some celibate cleric who actually believed that human beings hatch from eggs. Birth, love, and death are the 3 most significant events in life that nobody actually wants to see. Like a wedding. Most of your relatives don't want to see the hazy, naked twilight moment when you and so-and-so decide to spend your lives together. They would rather see the ritual reenactment, scripted, scheduled, and fully clothed in elaborate costumes. So your maiden aunt can freely deceive herself that the wedding is a dress rehearsal before opening night. And then, usually 2 or 3 months after the wedding, you get everybody together again for a baptism. Ritual reenactment of birth is a fantastic idea. For one thing, you never know the day or the hour. It's not like you can call your relatives and say, "Come on over and wait for the next few days. At some point, probably around dawn, we'll watch the birth and celebrate." Besides which, childbirth is nasty, and your maiden aunt, who's only met your wife once at the wedding, probably doesn't want to watch her sprout an infant. And what about the cheese whiz and crackers? Do they just sit there on a tray during 29 hours of labor? No, it makes a lot more sense to do the birth and then ritually reenact it in a nice, clean place at a predetermined time with all your clothes on, and then put the cheese whiz on the crackers. And if baptism was only an occasion to get relatives together and celebrate birth without actually having to watch it, I wouldn't have been so troubled. But unfortunately, there's something else. A confession that your baby has sinned. A plea for mercy and a requirement for you to make a lot of promises that you don't understand. The real problem is, a baptism is also an inquisition. Do you renounce Satan and all his works? We will, with God's help. Will you get this child to church on time every Sunday? Will, try, with God's help. Do you understand how the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost are one, but also 3, but more importantly 1, and yet 3? We might, with God's help, and a miraculous Catholic calculator. At least they don't give you a piece of paper and make you write a short essay about what original sin is, because I would totally fail that test. And there was another problem. The more I thought about it, I was becoming less and less convinced that I wanted to initiate our baby into this fraternity of God's favorite sons. You know, it's like signing your kid up for a sports team. You want to know, does this team usually win, lose, burn the other team's players at the stake? Because, you know, sportsmanship is important. I went to check on my son again. This time he was lying on his back trying to figure out what his fingers were. It's your call, I beamed at him. It's your life, your soul, your permanent record. Guilty or innocent, however you want to play it, I'll protect you any way I can. His eyes rolled up to mine. Guilty of what? I'm only 2 days old. I barely know what I want, much less if it's right or wrong. Let me do my terrible twos, my troubled childhood, my rebellious teens. Then we'll talk about forgiveness. But Dad, I need to know. What are these things always trying to get into my nostrils? They're called fingers. And if you ever discover a way to keep them out of your nostrils, tell me how. Thank you.